I'd like to just say a few thanks. Okay, thank you to ICS for supporting the Ethics Society Forum. The coffee is compliments of ICS, coffee and biscuits. They don't say biscuits in the United States, that's only for dogs, biscuits. In the UK and in Ireland, biscuits is for human beings. And so basically I'd like to thank my own project in Montserrat for helping to support Pete's visit here and his travel from Portugal to here. And also I'd like to thank the other project, Educación de la Afectividad y la Sexualidad Humana, Alfonso Osorio and Joaquín de Irala, I probably didn't pronounce that correctly, but anyway. They helped as well because they will also be hosting Peter for a talk tomorrow on theology of the body. So, so Pete's visit was supported from multiple directions, so at least two directions, two different projects. And of course, I would like to thank Pete for coming here and for preparing a very interesting talk. Actually, two interesting talks, one today and one tomorrow. So he's being kept busy by us. Just a quick introduction of Pete. Pete, well, first he's a friend of mine. I guess that's the most important thing from my point of view. And I met him in Philadelphia a few years ago, and we've been living in the general area of Philadelphia for a few years and have some common friends there. And he's sort of consider him like one of the people in my circle of close Catholic friends in Philadelphia. Pete he taught for 9 years for Franciscan University of Steubenville at their program in Gaming, Austria, as assistant professor of philosophy. In the fall of 2009, he joined the faculty at St. Charles Borromeo Seminary in Wynwood, Pennsylvania, as assistant professor of moral theology. He earned his BS in mathematics, that's Bachelor of Science, correct? Okay, not to be mixed up with other forms of BS. In mathematics from Franciscan University, an MA in Franciscan Studies from St. Bonaventure University, and his MPhil and PhD from the International Academy of Philosophy in the Principality of Liechtenstein. So it's a PhD in philosophy from the Principality of Liechtenstein. And how long were you there?
I lived in Liechtenstein for 5 years.
5 years. So he's lived in Europe for 5 years.
For 14.
14 years.
Because I lived in Austria also for 9 years.
Yeah. So,
Austria, yeah.
So he's a sort of, we can consider him half European. Just like I'm half American, because I lived there for 9 years. He's written a number of articles on themes within Christian personalism, developing also a critique of contemporary utilitarianism. And he has a very kind of dynamic website with lots of links and lots of talks and stuff. And he keeps it up to date, I believe, or at least sort of more or less. Yeah. And it's peterjcolosi.com, www.peterjcolosi.com. And it's just great to have Pete here, and hopefully we'll have an interesting discussion. He's going to give his talk in English, and so anyone who has difficulties with English, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do about it. But he will speak more slowly.
Yeah,
to try to accommodate people who have English as a second language, or third language, as the case may be. Okay, 40 minutes for the talk, roughly,
yeah.
And I'll give you a warning,
okay.
Maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes before,
sure.
10 minutes before, and then afterwards we'll have a Q&A. And the topic of the paper, unless it's been, it's still this topic,
same, yeah.
Ratzinger, Habermas and Pera on public reason and religion. I believe some of you have a copy of this talk to help you follow along. You can use that copy. There's also a list of quotes that Pete will be referring to, and it's a one-page, single page that I distributed, so you can use that as reference. Okay.
Thank you, David. Thank you all for coming. And Mariano is also my friend from Liechtenstein. In fact, he is the second reader of my dissertation, so he allowed me to become a doctor. So it's good to be here with you. And yes, my paper, so the quote sheet, I'm going to read my paper, and the quote sheet, if you only have that, I'll tell you when I get to each quotation, and you can read along the quotations, or you can just follow the paper. And it's a new topic for me. I don't really work in the field of political science. but this topic interests me because I've been teaching Catholic social teaching, and I noticed that Cardinal Ratzinger is writing books with atheists and agnostics. I found that interesting, and that's why I wrote this paper. Okay, so I'll just read it. It should take about 40 minutes. There are two kinds of atheists now. The atheists who think religion is the cause of all evil in the world and who strive to eradicate religion in order to bring about their version of a utopia. And then the atheists who perceive that the world is going terribly off track and wonder whether religion, after all, does have something to offer with respect to how we structure our common life together. This paper is about the conversation happening between that second type of atheist and people of faith, particularly on public policy questions. Recently, Joseph Ratzinger has collaborated on book projects with Jürgen Habermas, an atheist, and Marcello Pera, an agnostic. Both of them are philosophers, and Pera is also a great politician in Italy, an agnostic, on questions pertaining to the foundations of morality and the common good. Habermas, who once held a Rawlsian view with respect to religious voices in the public square, has changed his position. Here's quote 1 from Habermas. The liberal state has an interest of its own in unleashing religious voices in the public sphere, for it cannot know whether secular society would not otherwise cut itself off from key resources for the creation of meaning and identity. Habermas. Marcello Pera has expressed a very similar position to be discussed below. This new openness of some high-profile atheists and agnostics to religious voices in the public sphere, combined with the West's rejection of its moral heritage and historical roots, has led Joseph Ratzinger to the following suggestion. This is quote 2 on the sheet. In the age of the Enlightenment, the attempt was made to understand and define the essential norms of morality by saying that these would be valid et si Deus non daretur, even if God did not exist. We must reverse the axiom of the Enlightenment and say, even one who does not succeed in finding the path to accepting the existence of God ought nevertheless to try to live and direct his life veluti si Deus daretur, as if God did indeed exist. End quote. So the first axiom, et si Deus non daretur, can be explained as follows. Immanuel Kant, in his time, was deeply concerned about the loss of morality that would ensue from his position on the unknowability of God, free will, and the immortality of the soul. Thus, Kant decided to accept as postulates of practical reason, so of ethics, God's existence, free will, and the immortality of the soul. He did this in order that morality would not fall apart, which he thought would inevitably happen if people actually rejected God, free will, and the immortality of the soul when building their ethics. Marcello Pera expresses this by saying that Kant, and also Galileo, were trying to keep what is, and as such can be verified scientifically, together with what ought to be, and which is based on sources that are not scientific, or Pera adds rational, such as customs, belief, or faith. Kant and Galileo wanted to promote traditional morality even if God did not exist or could not be known to exist. Now Pera concludes, quote 3 on your sheet, the solution thought out by Kant did not succeed, because once it had taken hold, the logic of separation of scientific knowledge from morality and faith was more powerful than the logic of unification, end quote. I do not agree with those who hold that Kant's goal was the destruction of traditional morality. I think he was trying to get to the foundations of metaphysics and epistemology as honestly as he could. And then he saw the results of his antinomies, and this made him genuinely worried about what it portended for traditional morality. He then tried to head that destruction of traditional morality off at the pass, if you will, by proposing his postulates of practical reason. Now, nowadays we might say, why didn't Kant just reject his metaphysical and epistemological conclusions and rework his premises, if he was so worried about morality? The answer to that is he couldn't see how they were wrong. It took later thinkers to figure that out. I'm still working on I would venture to go so far as to say that Kant was hoping for someone to figure out the solution to his antinomies, so metaphysics and epistemology would be on a solid foundation. I would also say that even Kant's struggle to understand the relation between heteronomy and autonomy was not an attempt by him to destroy traditional morality. In fact, the absoluteness of the categorical imperatives constitutes a contradiction to Kant's notion of autonomy. At the same time he was defending autonomy against heteronomy, Kant was also trying to save exceptionless moral norms. He just couldn't see what John Paul II would later call participated theonomy as a solution to that dichotomy. Okay, Ratzinger remarks that the separation between science and morality, if you will, which ensued, indicates that our moral strength has not grown in tandem with the development of science. On the contrary, it has diminished. And this results, Ratzinger says, in the growing influence that power and profit inflict upon us. Ratzinger's approach is reminiscent of a line from Pope John Paul II's first encyclical, Redemptore Hominis. This is quote 4 on the sheet. The man of today lives increasingly in fear. He is afraid that what he produces can radically turn against himself. He is afraid that it can become the means and instrument for an unimaginable self-destruction, compared with which all the cataclysms and catastrophes of history known to us seem to fade away. End quote. Now that quotation leads one immediately to think of nuclear weapons. But it can also recall the devastation inflicted by mankind on mankind by the totalitarian regimes of Europe in the last century. And it applies equally to developments in biomedical technology. And, as we have seen and are seeing, it applies to capitalism as currently practiced. In his discussion with Jürgen Habermas, Benedict XVI expressed his idea that reason or science without religion and morality becomes fanatical. Science does. Giving as his example the fact that it is science that has put us in a situation where we can destroy the entire planet with the push of a few buttons. At the same time, in that discussion, Ratzinger also said that religion without reason becomes fanatical, and that therefore they need each other. With respect to the threats in biotechnology, which have resulted from the exaltation of science divorced from morality and religion, Ratzinger stated this. This quote is from his book with Habermas. Quote 5. Man is now capable of making human beings, of producing them in test tubes. Man becomes a product, and this entails a total alteration of man's relation to his own self. He is no longer a gift of nature or the Creator. He is his own product. Man has descended into the very wellsprings of power, to the sources of his own existence. The temptation to construct the right man at long last, the temptation to experiment with human beings, the temptation to see them as rubbish to be discarded. All this is no mere fantasy of moralists opposed to progress. End quote. It's all happening that. So, motivated by these extreme fruits of the separation of science from religion and morality, Ratzinger suggests reversing the axiom of the Enlightenment, asking that people of our day consider living as if God exists, even though they do not believe in Him. Now, why is that a reversal of the axiom of the Enlightenment? What is the meaning of the shift from living according to traditional morality, even if there is no God, to the idea of living life in such a way that you imagine God exists, and then living according to that? Is there even a difference between those two? There is a difference, and it is rooted in a change in the cultural backdrop from the 18th century to the 21st century. The reason why it was possible for people of the 18th century to agree on the basics, if you will, of traditional morality was because, as Ratzinger says, the great fundamental convictions created by Christianity were largely resistant to attack and seemed undeniable. But, Ratzinger continues, that is no longer the case. The Canadian philosopher Charles Taylor wrote a major work which won the Templeton Prize called A Secular Age. If I understand Taylor correctly, he does not mean by secular age that everyone in our day is living debauched lives. Whether that is the case or not, his definition of a secular age is something different. He means that in times past, there was a cultural backdrop against which everyone in society made decisions. That backdrop in the West was Christianity. And so, if a European left her faith, she knew exactly what she was departing from. Now, this does not mean that there was a golden age when everyone was living virtuous lives. It just refers to that Christian backdrop of society which sort of imbued European life and culture with a specific ethos of which everyone was aware. Taylor means that our age is secular because that backdrop is no longer. Christianity is just one option among a number of other options which one may select as equally as one's life philosophy. And if you talk to young people today, for example, American high school students who did not grow up going to church and who watch the popular TV shows, you do immediately realize that they truly do not have a foundational knowledge of Christianity. Either its faith principles or its social and moral principles. And that Taylor is right. That ethos is gone. Whereas if you talk to an older person who left their faith, you have something in common. They reject the faith, but you both understand what they are rejecting, more or less. There's no need to do the foundational catechetical work necessary to build a common ground basis to then have a conversation about rejecting or accepting church teaching. I think maybe of the new evangelization idea of Benedict. So the people in the 18th century had a co-natural knowledge of traditional morality because for centuries the cultural backdrop that colored their world was Judeo-Christian or Greco-Judeo-Christian. Kant was able confidently to suggest the postulates of practical reason because he lived in that setting. Now that this reassuring certainty of something that could go unchallenged is not part of the cultural mindset of contemporary Europeans or Americans, Ratzinger's meaning of reversing the axiom becomes clear. He's asking people of today to consider living according to a set of principles with which they are unfamiliar, but which offer relief from the malaise engulfing them. People in the 18th century, on the other hand, seeing the multiplication of Christian denominations and even doubting God, nonetheless did not want to lose the basics of morality, which they all knew and agreed upon. Marcello Pera responded that this proposal of Ratzinger should be accepted and his challenge welcomed. So there's a quote from Pera, number 6. This is a quote from Habermas, because he holds the same view now as Pera. He didn't used to. The force of religious traditions to articulate moral intuitions with regard to social forms of a dignified human life makes religious presentations on relevant political issues a serious candidate for possible truth contents. It's Habermas. And by the way, John Rawls himself adjusted his view in this direction. In his well-known article, The Idea of Public Reason Revisited, he said, quote 7, this is Rawls now, reasonable comprehensive doctrines, religious or non-religious, may be introduced in public discussion at any time, provided that in due course proper political reasons, and not reasons given solely by comprehensive doctrines, are presented that are sufficient to support whatever the comprehensive doctrines are said to support. End quote. Now it must be pointed out that Rawls did not go as far as Habermas, because Habermas holds that this demand to translate represents an unfair asymmetrical burden required of religious citizens but not of secular citizens. Habermas, he does hold the view that if after religious voices are heard on their own terms, those religious sources are then employed when enacting legislation, that then this translation would be needed to craft the actual laws. Nonetheless, departing from a dramatically Rawlsian position, Habermas calls for a balanced distribution of cognitive burdens, he calls it, when he asks secular citizens to give up their presupposition that religious traditions are nothing more than archaic relics of pre-modern societies. So, irrational, you'd say. And he asks the secular citizens to respect the religious voices as equal, even when they present their arguments in religious terms. Society, Habermas thinks, can learn from religious voices ways to better itself. Now, it is important at this point, I think, to notice something very interesting. For all of human history, human beings have practiced religion. The various world religions have developed strikingly similar social and moral codes. See the wonderful appendix at the end of C.S. Lewis's book, The Abolition of Man, for ample evidence of the striking uniformity of the Ten Commandment-like items of the great world religions. Now, while it is nice that world-class thinkers and politicians are now openly in support of listening to the religious wisdom of the ages in public policy discussions, I would say that Habermas and Pera nonetheless represent an oddity in light of world history. In other words, the great religious figures of the world's religions, as well as the billions of practitioners of those religions, they were also human beings. So for Habermas, Pera, and Rawls to now sort of deign to allow those human voices to participate in public policy discussions reveals, to take another phrase from C.S. Lewis, chronological snobbery at its height. Now, I don't think these men are snobs. Rather, I think they have realized that, that the well-known secularization thesis, so the view that human progress in the sciences, when that advances, then the need for the practice of religion would decline, they thought, that has turned out to be false. And that religious people, they both make up a large and growing population of the human community, and they have wisdom that can be applied socially in ways helpful to believers and non-believers alike. So at this point, a question emerges about the difference between Habermas and Pera on the one hand and Ratzinger on the other. It is all well and good that some big-name atheists and agnostics are now welcoming people of faith back to the public discussion. As I mentioned, how nice of them. But what of this idea of Marcello Pera that one can build a society on the scaffolding of Catholic social and moral teaching without anyone in that society actually believing the faith? Could that work? It seems to me Pera thinks this is not only possible but necessary to save Western society. In what sense does Ratzinger's view accept this notion of Pera, and in what sense does it not? In order to grasp this difference between the positions of Pera on the one hand and Ratzinger on the other, we must understand what Ratzinger means by faith. First, note that faith is often used in two distinct senses. One, by faith we mean the teachings of the Church. This can mean matters of revelation, but also the precise moral indications, like euthanasia is wrong, those sorts of things. A second meaning of faith is when we mean the lived relationship between a person and God, including also prayer and participation in the sacraments. So this is the distinction between the teachings of the faith and a living faith. In recent public discussions, I have noticed that those who disagree with Catholic positions have a premise in their arguments that faith is by nature irrational. As far as I can discern, they mean that both aspects of faith listed above are irrational. For example, if the Catholic faith teaches that marriage is between one man and one woman, or that contraception is immoral, these are said to be irrational teachings, in the sense that they violate equality or choice, which are considered to be rational, sort of an absolute sense. With respect to the second meaning of faith, this is said to be irrational in the sense that those who say they have a relationship with God are imagining it or producing it because of a psychological disturbance, or they're just afraid of the powers of nature or death. In discourse in the public sphere on matters of public policy, one task that Catholics or Christians or members of other religions are called to is to show the reasonableness of our teachings and their ability to contribute to the common good. For a specific example, we might outline the relationship between private property and the universal destination of goods in order to explain the flaws in capitalism as it is currently practiced. Or we might bring our understanding of married love to the public square for a hearing. Now, this is very important to do, and people like Habermas and Pera and others are now open to listening. But those people see no need for or connection to faith in the second sense. That is, they want to hear and even apply the teachings of faith, the teachings, to difficult public policy issues, but they see no need to connect those teachings to what I called above a living faith. Pera's position, if I understand him correctly, is that you can build a society on the scaffolding of Christian social and moral principles, even if no one in that society has faith in the second sense of a living faith. Ratzinger, however, sees an important and intrinsic connection between the teachings of the faith and a living faith. Interestingly, though, is that connection that Ratzinger sees is not that all non-believers must believe before the common good can be achieved based on true morality. In order to understand the precise nature of the connection and Ratzinger's idea that not all believers must come to belief in order for the teachings to have a positive impact on society, we must first say exactly what Ratzinger means by faith in the second sense, a living faith. So his definition of that. Ratzinger begins by making a distinction between natural faith and supernatural faith. He then says that what these two have in common is the same three-step structure, which is knowledge, trust, verification. Where natural and supernatural faith differ is in step one, knowledge. Examples given by Ratzinger of natural faith are electricity and pharmacy. There are some people who know how to harness and direct electricity, and there are also some people who know how to create drugs that can cure our various ailments. Most of the rest of us do not know how to do those things, and so we trust the small number of people who do. This trust in their knowledge is an act of natural faith. There are two reasons why this natural faith is not irrational. First, we can verify it by flicking on a light switch or taking the medicine. And secondly, such natural knowledge is obtainable by anyone who has the gumption to learn it. You just go get a degree in electrical engineering or pharmacy science. Now, compared to the entire population, though, only a few people actually gain that knowledge base. There are, in fact, many more examples in our daily lives of this setup, and so we all live, Ratzinger says, within a network of unknown quantities. There is a small number of people in whom a large number of people have natural faith, and this is not irrational for the two reasons given. So what then is supernatural faith? It has the same three-step process: knowledge, trust, verification. But the source of knowledge is different in kind than the source of knowledge in natural faith. Rather than learning about a field of study, the knowledge which is at the basis of supernatural faith comes from meeting a person. To take an example from Scripture, the Samaritan woman, she goes to the well at midday when no one else will be there because of the heat. And it's because she wants to avoid the looks and gossip of the other people which she receives because she's living in sin. That's why she goes at midday. They all get their water in the morning. She expects no one to be there, but someone is there. A conversation ensues between her and Jesus. And you all know the content of the conversation, but the subplot is simple. Jesus says, "I am God." And she says, "Really?" And he says, "Really, I am. And let me tell you about yourself." She then drops everything, goes back to town, and says to everyone, "You're not going to believe this, but I was just talking to God right over there." And they notice something about her. They notice something different, and likely combined with the fact that it is precisely this woman, they believe her. That is an act of faith. Then they set out for step 3, verification. After which they say to the poor woman, "We don't need you anymore. We met him ourselves, and we believe him." Now, Ratzinger holds that also with supernatural faith, a large number of people gain a living faith through a small number who have met God. In meeting a saint or in meeting a prophet, and Ratzinger's definition of a prophet is not somebody who sees the future. prophet is someone who has met God and has the task of introducing him to other people. That's what a prophet is. When you meet a saint or a prophet, then you acquire a living faith. The woman at the well, in this sense, is just like Moses when he comes down from the mountain, his face all beaming with light. This lived faith mysteriously opens one's eyes then to the dignity of persons and makes you look at others with a look of love, a phrase Benedict uses a lot. And this changes all of your behavior in a foundational way. Basically, you begin to live according to traditional morality. This often happens when people find this faith, because you can see it more properly now. And this then is noticed by other people, and they are drawn to you and drawn to that way of living. On the assumption, accepted by some high-profile atheist and agnostic thinkers, that Catholic social and moral teaching has, in fact, well-reasoned, common-sense principles to offer in the public sphere, principles they seem at times to be granting are the best source of bringing about the common good. Is it possible to employ those principles even if no one in the society has a living faith? That's a question. Marcello Pera thinks the answer is yes, and he is calling for Europeans to do this before Europe is no longer. Ratzinger's answer is yes, but. Ratzinger thinks the teachings are accessible to reason, and therefore, like Pera, which is why he writes books with him, he makes a plea for people to live as if God exists. Put simply, I take Ratzinger to mean something along these lines. Before it is too late, please try living according to the principles of Catholic social and moral teaching, because it really is good for you and society, and if you try it, you will see. Ratzinger is saying something like that. However, unlike Pera, Ratzinger thinks that unless there is a critical mass of citizens who have a deep faith, prayer life, sacramental life, and also live according to the teachings fully and even joyfully, he would say, unless we have that critical mass, then Pera's proposal, Ratzinger thinks, will fail. That is, Ratzinger does not think that a society in which no one had a living faith could sustain a structure built on the principles that grew out of that once living but now dead faith. But Ratzinger does not think that even a majority of the people in society have to live the faith deeply in order that its teaching and principles have an impact. Just a critical mass, which can in principle even be a minority, but a noticeable one. An interesting question emerges here with respect to the philosophical puzzle of whether morality must be grounded in God or not. People ask that question a lot. Is there a distinction between an implicit and an explicit foundation of morality on God? Let me formulate this idea in the form of 3 further questions. 1. What is the role exactly of Christian witness with respect to the knowledge of morality in the minds of non-believers? 2. What is the role of Christian witness in the formation of public policy when collaborating with non-believers, in particular with non-believers who are open to giving a hearing to believers? What's the role of our witness in that discussion? 3. Is there a sense in which knowledge of Christian morality, or even just knowledge of the natural law, can only be known by the wider public if a critical mass of people actually live a fulfilled life according to it, precisely out of their own interiorization of the truth and goodness and beauty of it? It is certainly true that we cannot live according to traditional morality on our own. We can barely do it and often fail even with the help of grace. But that desire to try, to really try, it does seem to come from meeting a saint or meeting God and the effect that has in one's soul. When non-believers encounter all of this in somebody, in a person, or in a large group of people, it can have 2 effects. It can open the non-believer to the possibility of living differently, even if they still don't believe in God, or it can open them to receiving the gift of a living faith themselves. which it is a gift. It's not something you can, one of the other points I don't have in my paper is in the book with Pera. He says God, the person is open, but then God is a person who has to respond to you. And then it's a gift that happens. So I think that Ratzinger is saying that for true morality to even be known by the wider public, there is an epistemological sine qua non, namely men and women who make God credible, he says, by their lives and by their happiness. In this sense, Ratzinger holds that a deeper knowledge of natural law morality for non-believers is rooted not in their faith in God, because they do not have that, but in seeing the lives of faithful Christians. This is an implicit or indirect source of real moral knowledge. I think Ratzinger holds that Christian witness can perform those two distinct roles. One, introduce people to new ways to live their lives, morally and socially. And two, to bring people to a living faith. In Ratzinger's conversations with Habermas and Pera, Ratzinger is focusing on the first of these two. That is, he's respecting their lack of faith in God. Then, he's agreeing with their idea that Christian principles have something to offer in the public sphere, which can be known by all people of goodwill. Furthermore, Ratzinger is tapping into their awareness that the West is unraveling, as evidenced by so many factors like nuclear weapons, the arms race, terrorism, the attack on mankind in biotechnology, destruction of the family, greed and consumerism in the market, improper treatment of immigrants. All these things loom so large that some atheists and agnostics are now motivated to take a second look at religion as a source of human wisdom, even in a secular age. Ratzinger, he's then calling on Christians to realize that if they want to even reach the level of convincing open-minded non-believers, of basic social and moral principles found in the Christian tradition, they have to be witnesses to it, or it won't work. So there's a quote here. I'll end with the quote from Pope Paul VI. It says, "Modern man listens more willingly to witnesses than to teachers. And if he does listen to teachers, it is because they are witnesses." Thank you.
Very interesting. We have